The Galactic Emperor Zargon's scream of rage shook the ship as he watched the video feed of Jason, a primitive human, effortlessly slaughtering his elite soldiers to rescue Princess Deneb. Jason's small spacecraft had crash-landed on the jungle planet Zygoth Prime. He kicked open the crumpled door, coughing from the smoke. The humid air hit him like a wall. Massive trees with blue leaves towered overhead. Bird-like screeches and insect chirps filled the air. He checked his body. A few cuts and bruises, nothing serious. He still had his wits, his elite Space Ranger training, and the high-tech survival gear in his pack. It would have to be enough. Jason froze as he heard a female scream in the distance. He sprinted toward the sound, leaping over massive roots and ducking under vines. He burst into a clearing and saw 6 hulking reptilian aliens in black armor attacking a slender, blue-skinned female in a torn silver jumpsuit. The soldiers turned to Jason, hissing and raising their plasma rifles. 6 against 1 seems unfair, Jason cracked his knuckles. For you. He launched himself at the nearest soldier, pivoting to dodge the plasma blast. Jason's armored fist connected with the alien's skull with a sickening crunch. He spun low, sweeping the legs of 2 more soldiers. Shots scorched the ground around him as he rolled and drew his pistol. Bam, bam, bam. 3 precise shots dropped the remaining enemies. The female alien stared at him in awe, sapphire eyes wide. I am Princess Deneb. How did you defeat them so easily? Who are you? Jason Young, Space Ranger. At your service. He holstered his gun and helped her up. Now let's get you somewhere safe and you can tell me why the goon squad was after you. As they hastily left the clearing, Jason had a sinking feeling this was just the beginning. He knew one thing for sure. There was no way in hell he was letting any more of those Zargon assholes get their claws on Deneb. Not while he still drew breath. He'd protect her, get her home and show that so-called emperor what humans were made of. Failure was not an option. The fate of the galaxy itself could be at stake. The steamy jungle seemed to close in around them as Jason and Deneb pushed onward. Massive insects buzzed through the air. Sticky sap dripped from alien trees. Jason hacked through the dense underbrush with his machete, clearing a path. A blood-curdling roar shook the forest. Jason shoved Deneb behind him as an enormous cat-like creature with 6 eyes and dagger-like fangs leaped out of the foliage. He raised his pistol and fired. The beast jerked and collapsed, dark ichor oozing from the hole in its head. "Goddamn Zygothian jungle cats," Jason muttered, poking the corpse with his boot. "Let's keep moving." As they slogged through a swamp, Deneb stumbled. Jason caught her, his hand brushing her blue skin. She looked into his eyes. "Why are you risking so much for me? You barely know me." Jason shrugged. "It's what I do. I'm a Space Ranger. We don't leave people behind. Besides, your pops would have my hide if I let anything happen to you." Deneb's face fell. "My father, I hope he's all right. When Zorgon invaded, he stayed behind to give me time to escape. He's the reason I made it this far." Jason placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Hey, if he's half as tough as you, I'm sure he's fine. We'll get you back to him. Now come on, we've got a lot of ground to cover." As they walked, Deneb told Jason about the technological wonders of her world. The towering crystal spires, the anti-gravity vehicles, the quantum computers. In turn, Jason regaled her with stories of Earth's past, the world wars, the moon landing, the invention of pizza. They laughed and joked, the horrors of the jungle momentarily forgotten. But the danger was far from over. High above the planet, on the bridge of his warship, Emperor Zorgon seethed with barely contained rage. He slammed a clawed fist on the arm of his throne. "I want that human's head on a pike," he bellowed, "and I want the princess alive. She knows too much about our plans." Commander Kresh, a hulking warrior with a bionic eye, knelt before him. "It will be done, my lord. I will unleash the Shadow Blades. They will not fail you." Kresh stalked to the armory, where a dozen of the deadliest assassins in the galaxy awaited his command. They wore jet-black armor and carried an arsenal of vicious weapons, plasma scythes, neurotoxin darts, sonic disruptors. "Hunt them down," Kresh growled. "Use whatever means necessary, but the princess is to be unharmed. Now go." The shadow blades deployed in stealth ships, invisible to radar. They glided silently through the atmosphere, homing in on Jason and Deneb's trail. The hunters had become the hunted. Unaware of the approaching danger, Jason and Deneb reached the outskirts of a fortified compound. Watchtowers loomed over electrified fences. Patrol drones buzzed overhead. "That's one of Zorgon's supply depots," Deneb whispered. "If we can get inside, we might find information on his battle plans. It could give my people a fighting chance." Jason grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Then what are we waiting for? Let's raise a little hell." Under the cover of darkness, they slipped past the perimeter defenses. Jason short-circuited the lock on a side door, and they crept into the complex. They made their way to the central computer core, dodging robotic sentries. Deneb accessed a terminal, her fingers flying over the holographic keys. Her eyes widened. "By the stars, Zorgon's army is larger than we ever imagined. He has thousands of warships, millions of soldiers. He plans to subjugate the entire quadrant." Jason leaned over her shoulder, scanning the schematics on the screen. He pointed to a glowing weak point on the hull of Zorgon's flagship. "There, that looks like some kind of thermal exhaust port. If we could hit that with a couple of proton torpedoes..." Deneb downloaded the data onto a crystal data chip. "This is the key to defeating Zorgon. We have to get this information to the Brunali resistance. It's our only hope." Alarms blared as they raced back through the compound. They burst out into the jungle, only to find themselves surrounded by the shadow blades. Kresh stepped forward, his bionic eye gleaming. "Surrender, and your deaths will be quick," he rasped, leveling his plasma scythe at Jason's chest. "Resist, and you will beg for the end before it comes." Jason glanced at Deneb. She nodded, reaching for her own weapon. As one, they charged forward, bellowing battle cries. Plasma bolts and laser beams lit up the night as they clashed with the deadly assassins in a desperate fight for survival and the fate of the galaxy. Jason's lungs burned as he and Deneb sprinted through the dense underbrush, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads. The shadow blades were hot on their heels, their enraged shouts echoing through the jungle. Jason zigzagged between the trees, using the terrain to his advantage. He lobbed a grenade over his shoulder, the explosion sending chunks of bark and leaves raining down. "How much further to your ship?" he yelled, vaulting over a fallen log. "Just beyond that ridge," Deneb panted, her blue skin glistening with sweat. They scrambled up the steep incline, rocks sliding beneath their feet. At the top they froze, their hearts sinking. In the valley below, the Brunali homeworld was under full-scale assault. Swarms of Zorgon's fighters strafed the city, explosions blossoming like fiery flowers. Towering walkers stomped through the streets, disintegrating buildings with each blast of their cannons. The sky was thick with warships, the largest of which could only be Zorgon's flagship, the Dreadhammer. "We are too late," Deneb whispered, her voice cracking. Jason's jaw tightened. "No, there's still a chance." He scanned the battlefield, his mind racing. The Brunali defense towers were holding the line, their force fields absorbing the brunt of the bombardment. But they couldn't last forever. They needed to take out Zorgon's command ship. "I have a plan," Jason said, turning to Deneb, "but it's going to be risky." They snuck aboard a Brunali dropship, blending in with the frantic soldiers. As they approached the Dreadhammer, Jason outlined his scheme. They would infiltrate the flagship through a maintenance hatch, make their way to the reactor core, and plant a payload of explosives. With any luck, they could cripple the ship and throw Zorgon's fleet into disarray. "I know that ship inside and out," Deneb said, her eyes hard. "I can get us where we need to go." The dropship shuddered as it latched onto the Dreadhammer's hull. Jason and Deneb slipped out, magnetic boots clamping onto the metal. They cut through the airlock with a plasma torch and climbed inside, weapons ready. The bowels of the ship were a maze of dimly lit corridors and thrumming machinery. Deneb navigated the labyrinth with practiced ease, Jason covering their rear. They ducked into alcoves to avoid patrols, held their breath as sentry drones floated past. At last they reached the reactor chamber, a cavernous space dominated by a pulsing sphere of energy. They planted the charges, fingers flying over the controls. Just as they armed the final explosive, a cold voice rang out. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Emperor Zorgon stepped from the shadows, a legion of elite guards at his back. He was a towering figure in midnight black armor, his eyes burning with malevolence. Jason shoved Deneb behind him, dropping into a fighting stance. "Get to the reactor controls," he muttered. "I'll handle Lizard Boy." Zorgon ignited his plasma glaive, the blade crackling with energy. He lunged at Jason, moving with inhuman speed. Jason rolled aside, the glaive scorching the floor where he'd stood. He came up firing, his blaster spitting crimson bolts. Zorgon deflected them with contemptuous ease, his laughter booming through the chamber. "Foolish human," he sneered. "You're no match for me." They traded blows in a whirlwind of slashing plasma and flashing steel. Zorgon was strong, fast, a master of his weapons. But Jason fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. He parried and dodged, giving ground, always keeping himself between Zorgon and Deneb. Deneb's hands flew across the control panel, sweat beading her brow. The reactor's shields were formidable, the system locked with encryption. But she knew this ship, knew its secrets. With a final keystroke, the shields fell. At that moment, Zorgon's glaive found its mark, carving a searing line across Jason's chest. He stumbled back, his armor smoking. Zorgon raised his weapon for the killing blow. A thunderous explosion rocked the ship, throwing them all to the floor. Alarms blared, red lights flashing. On the view screen, a dozen Brunali warships converged on the Dreadhammer, their weapons hammering its hull. "This isn't over," Zorgon snarled, staggering to his feet. He vanished in a swirl of teleporter energy, leaving Jason and Deneb alone in the disintegrating chamber. They ran, dodging geysers of flame, leaping collapsing walkways. The ship bucked and heaved around them, metal screaming as it tore itself apart. They tumbled through the airlock just as the corridor collapsed behind them, the vacuum of space sucking at their heels. A Brunali fighter swooped in, its tractor beam snatching them to safety. As it carried them away, the Dreadhammer burst like a dying star, a blossom of light and debris. Zorgon's fleet fell into chaos, ships scattering before the emboldened Brunali forces. In the fighter's cockpit, Jason and Deneb collapsed into each other's arms, exhausted, elated, unbelieving. They had struck a devastating blow against the Zorgon Empire, had given the Brunali a fighting chance. But the war was far from over. Zorgon would be back, more furious than ever. As the Brunali homeworld receded behind them, the scent of smoke still clinging to their clothes, Jason and Deneb looked to the stars, to the battles yet to come. As the Brunali fighters returned to their battered homeworld, Jason and Deneb were greeted by a sea of cheering faces. The Brunali High Council, their robes still singed from the battle, embraced them as saviors. In the Grand Hall of the Citadel, Jason was officially named Supreme Commander of the Brunali Defense Force. "You've given us hope," the Prime Minister said, clasping Jason's shoulder. "With you leading our warriors, we may yet prevail against Zorgon's tyranny." Jason, humbled by the trust placed in him, set to work immediately. He gathered a strike team of the Brunali's most skilled fighters, ace pilots, elite commandos, battle-hardened veterans. They struck hard and fast, hitting Zorgon's supply depots, cutting off his fuel and ammunition. They ambushed his troop transports, leaving his soldiers stranded on hostile worlds. Deneb, meanwhile, worked her diplomatic magic. She reached out to the Krill, the Xanthians, the Vaughn, races that had long suffered under Zorgon's boot. With impassioned speeches and ironclad logic, she convinced them to rise up against their oppressor. "Zorgon's strength is an illusion," she told them. "United, we can shatter his empire and forge a new galactic order, one of freedom and justice." One by one, the alien races pledged their ships, their soldiers, their resources to the Brunali cause. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had become a revolution. But Zorgon still had one card left to play. In his fortress on the volcanic moon of Noxus Prime, his scientists labored day and night on a weapon of unimaginable destructive power, the Nova Catalyst. Once completed, it would allow him to trigger a supernova in any star he chose, wiping out entire systems in an instant. Jason and Deneb, learning of this new threat, knew they had to act fast. With a hand-picked team of their best warriors, they infiltrated Noxus Prime. They fought their way through the fortress's defenses, energy shields, auto-turrets, genetically engineered war beasts. In the heart of the base, they confronted Zorgon himself, guarding the Nova Catalyst. "You fools," he snarled, his eyes blazing with hate. "You think you can stop me? I am the Emperor of 1,000 worlds. I will crush you like insects." Jason and Zorgon clashed in a furious melee, plasma blade against ancient katana. They traded blows across the catwalk above the bubbling lava pits, the air shimmering with heat. Deneb and the others fought desperately to hold off Zorgon's elite guard. "Go," Jason yelled, locking blades with Zorgon. "Destroy the catalyst!" Deneb raced to the towering machine, her fingers flying over the control panel. She had to reverse the polarity, overload the containment fields before... An ear-splitting klaxon filled the air. On the view screen, a countdown began. The Nova Catalyst was activating. They had mere minutes before it fired, before an entire star system, billions of innocent lives, were snuffed out in an instant. Jason, seeing the countdown, redoubled his assault on Zorgon. He battered the Emperor's defenses, driving him back with a flurry of strikes. Zorgon stumbled, his plasma blade flying from his grip. Jason kicked him square in the chest, sending him tumbling over the railing. Zorgon's scream echoed as he plummeted into the molten depths. Jason sprinted to Deneb's side, the countdown ticking away. Together they worked frantically, rerouting power, bypassing fail-safes. The containment fields flickered, the catalyst's core glowing brighter, hotter. The countdown reached single digits. 5, 4, 3... With a final, desperate keystroke, Deneb shut down the catalyst. The machine powered down with a descending whine, the countdown freezing at 001. They had done it. The Nova Catalyst was destroyed, Zorgon was dead, and the galaxy was safe. But as they emerged from the fortress battered and exhausted, they knew their work was far from over. Zorgon's empire, though crumbling, still clung to power on 100 worlds. There would be more battles to fight, more sacrifices to make. Jason and Deneb looked to each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They would face these challenges, as they had all the others, together, for the Brunali, for the galaxy, for the future. Jason and Deneb fought through the last of Zorgon's defenses, the acrid stench of burning circuitry and ozone filling the air. Plasma bolts sizzled past as they took cover behind a twisted slab of metal. The Doomsday device loomed before them, a monstrosity of pulsing energy and eldritch technology. "We have to shut it down," Deneb shouted over the chaos. She darted to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. Jason laid down covering fire, his blaster spitting crimson death. "Hurry, we're running out of time." A cold laugh cut through the din. Emperor Zorgon strode into view, his obsidian armor drinking in the light. "You're too late," he sneered. "The galaxy will be mine." Jason charged, a battle cry on his lips. He and Zorgon clashed in a whirlwind of slashing plasma and sparking steel. They traded blows across the chamber, evenly matched in skill and fury. "Why are you doing this?" Jason demanded, locking blades with the tyrant. "What do you hope to gain?" Zorgon's eyes flickered with an unnatural darkness. "You wouldn't understand, human. The power I seek is beyond your comprehension." Deneb, still working frantically at the console, froze. A horrible realization dawned on her face. "No, it can't be." Zorgon turned to her, a cruel smile twisting his features. "Yes, daughter, it is I." The world seemed to tilt under Jason's feet. Zorgon was Deneb's father. How was that possible? Deneb shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "What happened to you? You were a good man once, a kind ruler. How could you become this monster?" Zorgon's laughter was a thing of nightmares. "I have seen the truth, child. I have gazed into the abyss and embraced the power it offered. The void demon showed me the way." A chill ran down Jason's spine. He had heard whispers of the Void Demon, an ancient evil said to corrupt the hearts of men, if it had its claws in Zorgon. Deneb pleaded with her father, trying to reach the man he once was. But Zorgon was too far gone, consumed by the demon's malevolent influence. He lashed out with renewed savagery, dark energy crackling around him. Jason and Deneb fought back with everything they had, but Zorgon's power was too great. They were driven back, battered and bleeding. The Doomsday device pulsed with ominous light, seconds away from activation. In that moment, something shifted in Zorgon's eyes, a flicker of the man he used to be. "Deneb," he whispered, his voice strained. "I'm sorry." With a roar of defiance, Zorgon turned his powers inward, tearing at the demon's hold on his soul. The chamber shook with the force of their spiritual battle, reality itself warping and buckling. Jason saw his chance. He leapt forward, his plasma blade flashing. With a final desperate strike, he drove his sword into the heart of the Doomsday device. The machine exploded in a maelstrom of light and sound. Jason and Deneb were flung back, the shockwave slamming them against the far wall. Through the ringing in his ears, Jason heard Zorgon's final cry as the Void Demon was ripped from his body and banished back to the abyss. Then silence. The device was destroyed, the base collapsing around them. Jason staggered to his feet, pulling Deneb up with him. They limped towards the exit, supporting each other as the fruits of Zorgon's dark labor crumbled to dust. The war was over. The galaxy was saved, but the cost had been high. As Jason and Deneb emerged into the light of a new dawn, they knew their work was just beginning. Zorgon's empire was in shambles, but its remnants would need to be rooted out. The scars left by the conflict would take years to heal. But for now they could breathe. They had each other and a future worth fighting for. The horrors they had endured would never leave them, but they would use that pain to make themselves stronger, to ensure that no one else would ever suffer as they had. Jason looked to the stars, to the countless worlds now free from Zorgon's iron grip. It was a new age, a time of hope and possibility, and he and Deneb would be its guardians, now and always. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.